All right. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see a lot of you before. As many of you know, I've been here before the club on a couple of occasions. I think this is my third time being with you. I grew up in Williamsburg. I moved to East New York, grew up there in the 80s and 90s, and I've been back in Williamsburg since 1994. So this club actually means something to me because it's a club of people who want to make the neighborhood better in Bushwick and Williamsburg area. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about what I'm doing. So I'm the acting DA of Brooklyn. I've been the acting DA for a little over 6 months. I took over when Ken Thompson passed away. I've been making strides to make sure that the Brooklyn DA's office can be a national model for what a progressive DA's office should look like. And we've done that work together. I was the chief assistant for the last 3 years for Ken Thompson, meaning I was number 2 person in the office. And I was the person who created the conviction review unit with him, meaning that the conviction review unit directly reported to me, and I made the final recommendation that the CRU and the independent review panel would make, and I would make the final thing. So I've been involved in all 21 cases that we vacated. I vacated a case of my own, so it's been 22 cases so far in Brooklyn. As we all know, there's a lot of work to be done. We have about 100 cases still pending. I also helped Ken create the marijuana reform policy that simply was about pushing back on too many low-level arrests in the city. We had, in 2013, there was about 13,000 arrests in Brooklyn alone for marijuana. We decided that we wanted to do something about it, and we said if you were in possession of 25 grams or less, we would go ahead and decline to prosecute those cases. When we presented that to the police in March of 2014, I can tell you that they didn't agree with that policy. We continue to do the work, and as you know now, the policy of the City of New York is to issue summonses in most of those cases and not put people through central booking. I think my office was a big part of that, and that's one of the things that we need to continue is smart ways where we can move the criminal justice system to make it fairer and to make sure that people are treated with respect and dignity. What I'm looking to accomplish in the DA's office is very simple. We've gone a long way. I grew up in East New York. The years I was living there, East New York had about 820 homicides. Last year we had 127 in Brooklyn. We've become incredibly safer. But the person who leads the DA's office needs to also be reform-minded and create programs and create opportunities to divert young people, crime prevention. And in the short period of time that I've been the acting DA, I've implemented a few things that I think get us there. So one of the things that I've recently initiated was an immigration policy. For those of you who've heard about it, that policy really looks to treat people with respect and dignity in the criminal justice system. And we always want to make sure that our immigrant populations feel safe and secure. Our non-citizens will feel that they can come to the DA's office and be involved with law enforcement and not be afraid that they'll be turned over to immigration. And the mayor and the governor and the city of New York, I mean, we're all on the same page on that. I've taken it a step further. I said that my office should have immigration attorneys on staff to help people who've been accused of crimes. I think we all believe in the presumption of innocence, and I think that people who are accused of a crime, especially if it's a low-level crime, need to understand the immigration consequences that are involved. And for too long, and I've been a prosecutor for 20 years, we left it up to defense attorneys to kind of let us know when there's an immigration issue and could we work around it. And what I've now charged assistant DAs is to say you have to work with the defense attorneys and you have to kind of let everyone understand that there are possible immigration consequences to these low-level offenses. Will that help the undocumented population of Brooklyn? Absolutely. But will it also help our non-citizens, people with green cards and visas, and people here with status? It will. I can tell you from personal experience how many cases I see come into the system where someone traveled home, they have a visa, they have a green card, and they're denied reentry coming back, or after many years of being a long-term resident in our city, they now have immigration consequences because they pled in the 1990s to a drug charge, or in 2000s to petit larceny, stealing something. I think that's perverse. I think it's unfair. I think it's draconian. There have been 35,000 more interceptions so far in immigration work. So we know that this is important work. These immigration attorneys that we're putting on staff will help the DAs make recommendations to the court that tend to be immigration neutral. When we can do that, there won't be any jeopardy to public safety, because none of these cases people are going to jail. These are people who come into the system, they're cycled in and out of the system, they plead guilty, maybe they get a couple days of community service, maybe they get 5 days jail, and then 5 years from now, they have to worry about an immigration consequence. I think it's wrong, and so we're going to change that, and we have changed that in Brooklyn by doing what I'm talking about. And I'm continuing to do work to make sure that we treat people with respect and dignity. In Brooklyn, we created a young adult court. I've talked about that in the past. It's 16 to 24. The idea is to work with young people to get them therapeutic help. Again, having spent over 20 years in the office on low-level cases in particular, young people are just cycled through the system. They come in, they plead guilty to something. It could be a violation, it could be a misdemeanor. They get a couple days community service, maybe they get an ACD, and they're sent home. And nothing is done to try to address the underlying problems. Young adult court is all about fixing problems and working with young people. So they come in, they get arraigned, they meet a social worker. Social worker tries to figure out what's happening with the young person. Are there services they need? We all know the studies of brain science. Your brain's not fully formed until 25. So you're particularly able to get therapeutic help. We do counseling and treatment, anger management, and we work with the young people. The great part is after the person completes the program, I'm willing to dismiss the case. I'm not worried about the metrics of a DA's office that's looking at conviction rates. I'm willing to dismiss the case if the young person complies and completes the program, preventing these collateral consequences. How am I doing with time?
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I'm looking forward to the support of the club, and thank you for listening to me.
Oh, I think we want to get some questions first.
Yeah.
I think we did go a little over, so I will skip my question and go ahead and open it up to membership. If anyone has a question for a DA candidate.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on bail reform?
Good question. So I've implemented in Brooklyn a presumptive ROR program. Recently instilled. We train the ADAs on low-level offenses, misdemeanors. We're presuming an ROR, and so very specifically, there's some cases that I'm asking the DAs to consider bail. There's no category of bail that there's no category of cases that you must ask for bail on misdemeanors, but on domestic violence cases, on sex crimes cases, on crimes against children. Those are the cases where I strongly recommend an ADA to think about whether or not jail is appropriate. But on the average case, it's a presumptive release with no bail being asked for. That's a new policy. I've been speaking to some of the people of the Brooklyn Bail Fund and some of those other bail reform-minded policies. The other thing is that we should also say that Brooklyn was one of the pilot places for supervised release. So we've been working with supervised release for a while. It's been fairly successful in Brooklyn. It's been very successful in getting people to come in without the need for bail. So I'm actually doing some of the work, and we'll see how that turns out, but it's been a few weeks now. Yes?
Oh, I don't want, I mean, I already.
Okay.
I'm curious about, we have, up towards Greenpoint, we have an issue with, for instance, the police precinct there not really taking some sex crime issues seriously. It's sort of a culture of the police department. And it's obviously with the recent event on Banger Street a few weeks ago. I'm just curious, how are we able to have more confidence about prosecution of crimes in an area like that where we can't even be sure that the police precincts are properly taking the event seriously and also capturing evidence? I mean, in that case, the site was, basically left open to be contaminated.
Right, so a good question. I mean, on that particular case, I know the facts very well. I'm not going to get into all the facts, but
just generally.
What I think you have is when you have concerned citizens, and so what happened is that case happened, I received calls from people, actually some people from this club and from other leaders in the community, and the very next day we had the victim come in. Instead of inundating her with a prosecutor, like, grilling her on what happened, she met with social workers first to kind of assess where she was at, her level of cooperation, how far she wanted to go, and then we've been working with her. And so I expect that in the next few weeks or so, you'll hear some progress was made on the case. But I think the answer is that we need to have dialogue between the community and law enforcement and DAs. And we do have oversight over cases. And in this case where the police department had decided not to make an arrest, there was concern in the community. I got personally involved, had reached out to the young lady. She came in and she's working with us. So I think the answer is in cooperation, and that's why it's important that you get to know the DA, so that you have access to the office, and then we make sure that that happens. And then if there's systematic problems, the DA has a role in speaking to the police commission and other people to say, we have a problem here and we have to do something about the problem.
I mean, just thinking that, it just in terms of Greenpoint, it's important for us to feel that the citizens aren't the only ones sort of babysitting the precinct as far as making them take these crimes seriously.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's why there's, and there's been issues in that precinct as well.
Anyway, thank you.
Sure.
That's all the time we have, but thank you again, Eric. It was really informative.
Thank you.